You're very welcome back. Now, our next guest has made waves internationally with her first novel, Her Hidden Fire.
The book is inspired by her own life and upbringing. Please welcome a debut author, Clíodhna O'Sullivan. Good morning, Clíodhna. How are you? It's lovely to have you here.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate it.
It's so nice. You have delved into this world. Like, you're going on. It's been picked for Good Morning America's Book of March, which is huge. This is Her Hidden Fire. It's the first in a trilogy. It is a romantasy. Please tell us about it.
Yeah, so like my 10-second pitch, if I was chasing you into...
Oh, here we go. I love it. A 10-second pitch.
No, if I was chasing you into an elevator, what I'd be saying is it's searing, it's sexy, and if you've ever felt used or exploited, I hope it makes you feel a little bit seen. And the kind
I'm in.
I'm in. Yeah.
I'm in. That is
That's
a good pitch. That's a good pitch. You've created a whole world.
Yes.
Like this is for anyone who's thinking, like, you know, when you read Lord of the Rings first time or Game of Thrones, and you go to the map at the front to kind of get your bearings and your glossary, and it's very much Irish.
Oh no, definitely. Like I was far
I
was far too lazy to come up with something original of my own. So like I just basically used places that I knew and dragged them all over the place. So like, you know, I really love Ardgillan Castle, like up in, you know, it's kind of on the northeast coast there, just up north Dublin. And like if you've ever visited it, like, you know, you go out to see Ardgillan and like you come out of the woods and you're looking down the hill at this forbidding castle with like the sea behind it. And you're kind of thinking, yeah, I could definitely see some dark magic happening in there, like some evil wizards or whatever. And what I did was I transplanted Ardgillan out to Lambay, which is obviously a real island. Although in the book there's magically now 3 islands of Lambay.
Yes.
So, and then similarly, like I took the Blackstairs because I grew up in Carlow myself. So like I moved the Blackstairs up north because I'm sorry, but Blackstairs is such a great name for a mountain range.
It is.
Yeah, it really is.
So yeah, so like it's basically, it's all Irish stuff basically. So I could log off early for the day, like, you know, so.
How does your book get chosen as the book of the month on Good Morning America? Are people submitting things on? Is there a panel of people, or how does it done?
Yeah, so like it's amazing. This is all stuff I'm learning because it's my first book, like, you know, the way. So, but what kind of happens is that first, you know, it was picked by Penguin in the UK, and that was, hooray, I'm so happy. And then like a kind of year later, it was preempted by Penguin in the US. So basically, before it went out on auction, they said, we'll have that, please, thank you very much. And so that was like, yay, we're going to America. But then what you realise is that you kind of have like, you have champions. Like your editor is kind of your champion within the publishing house. So like I have this amazing editor, Jenny, who's my publisher, who's my editor over in America, who is kind of advocating for the book within Penguin to sort of say, let's give this a push, let's publicise it or whatever. And then, you know, you get a publicist assigned, and I got this absolute powerhouse of a publicist called Olivia, who's just really amazing and never stops. And I swear to God, she just wears people down. and then she would have put
Good Morning America went, oh, OK, we'll take it.
Stop it, like, leave me alone. But yeah, so in the end, then, so she was very clear. Like last July, I remember doing a phone call with her where she said, I asked to be the publicist on your book because I love it so much.
Oh, wow.
And we're going to try and get Good Morning America for you. And that was last July.
Yeah.
So like, it just gives you an idea like of what a long time frame it is that she would have put it in then on submission into them, and they read it and decide if they want to pick it or whatever.
And obviously romantasy is huge. Like it is the genre of the moment, the top selling all over the world, bar Frida McFadden's book probably. And with this we've got Éadha and Yunanine, and he is going to a night of the reckoning. He's got to find out if he's still magic.
Yeah, exactly.
And then Ava is like his mate who's been kind of working with him since he was a child, but they're in love, you know, they like each other, whatever. This is a world of magic. This is a world of case systems.
Yeah, it is,
like this is, there's a lot, so like what's going on here?
Yeah, so basically, like I very much wanted to structure it, you know, around the kind of extraction economy, basically, because I grew up poor myself, and I had to basically, I got to the end of like secondary school and I had maximum points in my Leaving Cert, but I wasn't able to go to college because my dad had a bunch of gambling debts and he was an alcoholic. So what would have happened was that I was sort of 16 with all these A's, but not able to use them. I had a place in medicine in college, wasn't able to go. So then I ended up doing like a load of, you know, just, you know, I was a cleaner, I was a singer, I was a fruit picker, you know, I did a whole load of jobs just to kind of save up money. And I was just very aware of just how much exploitation there is out there of kind of poorer, younger, more vulnerable people. And just that sense of that there's some people who are very happy thanks very much, to exploit people, but then sort of strut around town as the kind of the big man or the entrepreneur or whatever, when it's really just the same tired old trope of just paying people under the table and whatever. So I always thought in my head, if I was to write a book, because fantasy, what's wonderful about fantasy is it allows you to take something from our own world and then sort of do it on steroids, you know, in the fantasy world. So the kind of underlying premise of all this is that the magic is quite dark, in the sense that you learn that it's wonderful at the start and you think it's great that you're able to do magic, but then actually the power source for the magic is the life force of ordinary people who are kind of hidden away. So you have this elite who are strutting around the place going, we're the channelers, we're the best, we deserve everything, and the 1% kind of thing. But actually they're sort of drawing magic off the back of ordinary people.
You do that so brilliantly in the book, but the fact that it is so rooted in your everyday life, because your dad was the principal of a school.
Yeah.
And I think I heard you say that when you were like 8 years old, like was he functioning alcoholic or not? Because you used to have to go down and open the school.
Oh yeah. Oh, that was because he would have been out drinking the night before, so you know, it was really almost impossible, like, to get him awake again. Do you know what I mean? So I would take the keys and head down, and because the other teachers and the kids and whatever would be there at the school.
Waiting to get in.
So I'd take the keys and go down and be responsible for opening up the school while we tried to get him awake and up and down. Do you know what I mean?
What was home life like?
Not fun, I'll be honest with you. Like, you know, because like it was very much that thing. I don't even know if you can replicate it so much now, because in those days, like, there was no divorce. So it was very much just that sense of you just had to stay together no matter how broken down your marriage was. And the kind of thing was that the men maybe had a way to escape, because, you know, they could head out, you know, they had the car. There was always only just the one car. We lived in rural Ireland, so whoever was gone in the car, everybody else was stuck in the house for the day. Very isolated kind of thing. And then just a huge amount of volatility, because he'd come home drunk or whatever, and then there'd be rows and fighting and screaming and whatever, and which sort of ties back to how I ended up writing a fantasy novel, because fantasy books were kind of my escape during that time. Like, honestly, like, if you can just kind of picture me as a teenager, I just had a book on my lap the whole time. Like, if I was at the dinner table and they were around with each other, I had the book open under the table and I was just reading it, and it was just my way of just sort of trying to go, I'm not in this, like, do you know what I mean? Like, you two are kind of fighting each other to the death, but like, this is not my fight, you know.
And can I ask you then, like, moving forward, and can you just fill us in on the background of what took you off to the hotel one night that you started the book, or you started to write? Just fill us in a little on the background, why you needed to take yourself out of a situation to a hotel one night.
Yeah, because I'd spent a good few years. So come from a poor background, the main thing you want to do is not be cold and put a roof over your head. And, you know, after that, I really wanted to find love, which I did, and I was very lucky. Do you know what I mean? So those were my kind of priorities, was being sensible and getting the sensible job, and, you know, that was all grand. But I also desperately wanted to write. Like, I really wanted to write stories, but I kept putting it off and putting it off and putting it off. And then what happened was that my youngest son, when he was born, he developed meningitis during labour. And so he was put into an induced coma for several days in the intensive care ward. And it was this whole thing where they sit you down and go, the next few hours will be crucial. And no one, you never want like a paediatrics neonatal specialist telling you the next few hours will be crucial. And then he was in intensive care in Holles Street then for several weeks. Now he's 100% fully recovered. He's very funny about it, because when I only told him about what had happened to him when he was older, when he was a little bit older, do you know the way? And I said, well, they had to freeze you to, you know what I mean, to stop the virus.
Thing, I'd never heard of it.
I had never heard of it, and it saved his life.
They froze.
Yeah, they froze him basically
to
stop the virus from travelling, to kind of cause damage. But when I told him that this is what had happened to him, he says, oh, so I'm like Captain America. They took me out of the ice, which I just thought was brilliant. Like that he was so cool about it. Do you know what I mean? It's like, oh, so I'm like Captain America.
Amazing.
They took me out of the ice. So yeah, so there was and like, when you have that experience of kind of realising how close death is, even at the moment of birth, it kind of does shake you up, and you want to get your priorities straight after that. Then my mum died a few months after that very suddenly, and then the company that I was working in was sold, and those of us who were in the company that was bought, most of us were let go. So I was at home. I was at home. I was unemployed for the first time since I was 16, with no income. I had a baby that I was still breastfeeding and worried about, and just kind of going, and also obviously kind of grieving the fact that my mum had passed. And I was just kind of going, do you know what? My life cannot just be all about coping with the knocks, because absolutely life sends you knocks, and some of it is about coping it, but that can't be the whole story. And so I said to my husband, I time out, I just need a night out. So I headed off with the breast pump, headed off down to the hotel for one night, because, if you're looking after a baby or whatever, you can't be heading off for 2 weeks in the Seychelles, But I said, I'm going away just for one night, just to clear my head. And I remember, it was the pool, there was a pool in the hotel, and I was swimming up and down in the pool and just going, look, what was the time when, even though things were tough, I felt happy and at peace. And it was remembering reading the young adult fantasy when I was a teenager, when my parents would be round and it would be grim enough in the house, but I was able to step out. So I thought, that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to try and write a fantasy that's going to try and create that sense of wonder that those books gave me. I'm going to try and create one of those worlds myself. So I literally, and I sat down, got out of the pool, because I was so kind of just in the moment, got out of the pool, put on the dressing gown, headed up to the reception area, sitting in the reception area with my dressing gown on, and started writing. And the thing is, in the particular hotel, and you'll know this, if from the first few chapters of the book, there's a bit at the start of the book where it describes that there's there are trees holding up the hall, and there's a spiral staircase that goes around the trees. That's from the reception of the hotel that I was sitting in at the time, because as I said it to you earlier, I'm very lazy and I will steal whatever I can.
So it was just that day in that hotel that sparked the whole thing.
It was just in that day. I remember going down afterwards saying it to your man, to the fella that owned the hotel, that I literally started a book in your hotel. And I made a point of going down to finish it. So when I was nearly at the very end to write the last few chapters, I went down and I stayed for 2 nights this time to write the last chapter of the book in there, because I thought it'd be a nice kind of synchronicity, about doing that.
We must say, when it came to this book, this wasn't plain sailing. You wrote this a while ago. There was knockbacks. It was almost got published. The publisher went out of business the day that was meant to be published. You eventually got to Penguin. Who wouldn't love getting to Penguin? But this is a testament to your will, because I think we glossed over the fact that you said you had the highest points in the leaving.
I represented Ireland actually at the International Young Linguist Competition, and I was shortlisted for the Irish Maths Olympics team, and I still couldn't go to college.
And you couldn't go to college.
I know.
Because your father had racked up so many debts. But because he was the principal of a school, it was
he had a
salary.
Yeah, so didn't qualify for a grant.
So didn't qualify for a grant.
Yeah.
So what? And then you start working these jobs. 16 years old. I know you're helping out at home. Your mother's in this situation where she can't get out of this marriage because there's no divorce. You end up becoming you make it your way to college.
Yeah.
You get to college.
I put myself to college. Yeah.
You got to college. You became a solicitor.
Yeah. Yeah, and the only reason I did that, I would have much preferred to have done something creative, but I think a lot of people who come from not money would say the same thing, that you kind of feel like that kind of creative stuff is not for you because there's no regular income. And the priority, like I said, is not be cold, have a roof over my head. So it was just, and also feeling a bit, that pressure to be the good daughter. I mean, the cliched eldest child of an alcoholic. There's a whole bunch of literature about it. So it's a terrible thing to realise you're a walking cliche, but I am a walking cliche. Because what happens is that you try to be perfect. So you try to be no trouble, you try to get really good grades. You know what I mean? So I'm absolutely like a cliche. And part of the cliche was I will do the sensible degree. And because I was paying for it myself, I didn't do medicine because medicine was 6 years and that was expensive, and I hadn't saved up enough money from the old cleaning the toilets and the whatever. But law was 3 years in UCD. So I thought, right, if I take the savings I have and I just work in the evenings and at the weekends, I can get through it. And I didn't like it at all. It wasn't for me. But I had been sort of brought up not to think that I was allowed to do what I wanted to do anyway. Do you know the way it was just very much kind of you're not allowed to have needs of your own.
You were in service. You were minding other children.
You're part of the unit, and you have your role in the unit, which is to be the responsible child. Because what happens to the eldest child of the alcoholic is that they're almost trying to step in for the alcoholic.
It's
like the analogy.
And do other things and help the mother.
The analogy I would use is it's like the portrait of Dorian Gray, only you're the portrait.
You're the portrait.
Do you know what I mean? Because your father gets to go off and have a great time and gamble and stay up all night playing poker, and you're being the grown up at home. Do you know?
Never mind the book. When's the story of when's the film of your life going to be made?
It is. I wish we could talk to you. It's fascinating talking to you. And honestly, I know that the second book is finished.
It is,
You're doing the edits on the third book right now. This is the trilogy. It's called Her Hidden Fire. It's like, lads, it's romantic. You're going to get lost in this world. Clíodhna O'Sullivan, it's been a pleasure talking to you. Thanks so much
for having me.
Seriously,
so nice that film has to be made.
Amazing. Thanks so much.
Thank you.